They told him he was too old to carry a rifle. He was 49. So they handed him a shovel and sent him to the back of the line. Then, at 6:40 in the morning on December the 18th, 1944, every young man around him was gone. And one old soldier was the only thing left standing between a column of German tanks and the open road behind a small stone bridge in Belgium. He had one rifle. It was older than most of the men who had laughed at him. 6 hours later, that bridge still had not fallen. How does one old man hold a bridge alone for 6 hours? Start where it ended. The snow was gray, not white, gray because the smoke had settled into it. He lay flat behind a low stone wall at the foot of the bridge, and he did not move. His coat was soaked through. His hands had stopped hurting, which was worse than when they hurt. 40 meters away, across the little river, the road bent out of the trees. He watched that bend. He had been watching it for hours. Then the bend filled with steel. A tank came around it slow, feeling for mines, its long gun swinging like the head of an animal. Behind it walked men in gray. 10 of them, maybe more. They had stopped counting on the bridge being easy. A long time ago, now they came careful. They came for the old man specifically. He had 4 bullets left. He pressed his cheek to the cold wood of the rifle. He breathed out slow, the way he had been taught in another war, by men who were all dead now. And he waited for the tank to give him the one thing he needed. That is the end. To understand it, you have to go back to why a 49-year-old man was at that bridge at all. Back to the rifle they called a museum piece. And back to the one fact that everybody who knew him would have told you that morning, with total confidence. In 4 months in Europe, this man had not fired a single shot at the enemy, not one. So how does a man who has never fired a shot end up holding a bridge? Alone, let me tell you, his name was Walter Mercer. The young ones called him Pop. In December of 1944, Pop Mercer was a private with an engineer combat battalion attached to the American First Army in Belgium. Engineers are not the men you picture when you picture war. They build, they fix roads. They throw bridges across rivers in the dark so the tanks can cross by dawn. And when they have to, they blow those same bridges to dust so the enemy cannot. It is skilled work. It takes a steady hand and a cold head. Pop had both. What he did not have was youth. Most of the men in his outfit were 19, 20. A few were 18 and had lied about it to get there. Pop was old enough to be the father of every single one of them, and on a bad day, old enough to be a grandfather to some. He had gray in his mustache. He had a bad knee from a horse in 1916. And he had a war behind him that none of these boys had been alive to see, because Walter Mercer had done this before. He had fought in the First War, the big one, the one with the trenches and the gas and the mud that swallowed men whole. He had gone over the top as a young man in 1918, and he had come home. And he had spent 25 years being a normal man in a normal town. Then the Second War came for his country's sons. And a man his age was supposed to stay home and grow a garden and read the newspaper and worry. Pop did not stay home. He talked his way back in. The army did not want him for the front, and they told him so to his face. 49-year-old men do not assault beaches. They do not jump out of planes. They do not hump a rifle through the snow for 20 miles. So the army did what armies do. They found him a job that needed an old man's patience and kept him away from the shooting. They made him an engineer. They put him in the rear. They figured the war would never quite reach him. The young men in his unit liked him fine, but they did not respect him as a soldier, and they did not pretend to. To them, he was a kind of mascot, the old fellow who told stories about a war their grandfathers fought. The one who moved slow in the cold and groaned getting up off the ground. They gave him the nickname Pop because it was true and because there was a little laugh hidden inside it, and then there was the rifle. Every other man in the outfit carried the new weapon, the Moen Garand, the rifle that loaded itself and fired as fast as you could pull the trigger. Pop did not carry the new rifle. Pop carried the old one. He carried the Springfield he had been issued in the last war, a bolt-action rifle you had to work by hand, one round at a time. With a little metal lever between each shot, it was a slow gun. It was a stubborn old man's gun. To the boys in his unit, it looked like something out of a museum, and they told him so often, and they laughed when they said it. "Pop, that thing's older than my mother. You gonna throw rocks if that runs dry. They let you keep that out of charity, old-timer." He let them laugh. He cleaned that rifle every single night. He cleaned it when his hands were so cold they would barely close. He could take it apart in the dark and put it back together blind, and he did, sometimes, just to keep his fingers working. The boys thought it was a quirk of an old man. They did not understand it yet. They would. Here is the thing nobody in that unit understood about Pop Mercer in the first week of December. They thought the war had passed him by. They thought he was safe in the rear because the rear was safe. But in the middle of December 1944, the rear was about to stop existing because something was coming through the forest that nobody saw. To the east, in the cold and the dark of the Ardennes, the German army was getting ready to do the last thing anyone expected. The Allies thought Germany was finished, beaten, out of fuel, out of men, out of time. The line through the Ardennes forest was held by tired American units and green ones. Men sent there to rest or to learn, because everyone agreed nothing would ever happen there. It was a quiet place, a safe place, a place for an old man and a museum rifle. On the 16th of December, Germany attacked there with everything it had left. It came at dawn, out of the fog, through the snow, a huge surprise blow aimed straight through the weakest part of the American line. Hundreds of thousands of German soldiers, tanks the Americans could barely stop. The plan was bold to the point of madness. Punch through the forest, race to a great river called the Meuse, cross it, and drive all the way to the sea, splitting the Allied armies in two. The battle this became would get a nickname the world still uses. They called it the Battle of the Bulge. For the Great Bulge, the German attack punched into the American line on the map. And at the very tip of that attack, leading the whole charge, was one man and his tanks. His name was Joachim Paper, an SS colonel, and he led the armored spearhead of the entire offensive. His orders were simple and they were brutal. Drive fast, drive deep, do not stop for anything, reach the river before the Americans could wake up and react. He had powerful tanks and hard, experienced men. And in the first 2 days, he tore a hole in the American rear and poured through it like water through a broken dam. But Paper had a problem, and the problem would decide everything. His tanks drank fuel by the barrel, and he did not have enough. He knew it from the start. The whole plan only worked if his racing tanks could capture American fuel along the way and keep moving. If he stopped, he died. If he ran dry, the most powerful tanks in the world became cold iron sitting in the snow. So every hour mattered, every mile mattered, and every single thing that slowed him down, a roadblock, a firefight, a delay of even 1 hour. Burned fuel he could not spare, and time he did not have. There was one thing that slowed him most of all, one thing that turned out to matter more than any battle: bridges. Paper's heavy tanks could not swim, and they could not jump. To cross a river, they needed a bridge strong enough to hold their enormous weight. The little wooden bridges built for farm carts would splinter under them. They needed the big stone ones. And the Americans, falling back in front of him, figured this out fast. So all along his path, in the snow and the dark, small groups of American soldiers raced to reach the bridges first. Not to hold them, but to destroy them, to drop them into the rivers before the German tanks could roll across. And the men who could do that, the men with the skill to bring a bridge down, were the engineers. Bridge after blown bridge stood between Paper and the river. Each one forced his column to stop, to back up, to search for another way around, to find a road his tanks could actually use. Each one cost him an hour he would never get back. The men who blew those bridges were combat engineers, and history would later give them a name they earned the hard way. The Germans called them the damned engineers because every time the tanks thought the road was open, the engineers had dropped another bridge into another river right in front of their faces. You see where this is going now. Pop Mercer was an engineer. And the war that everyone said had passed him by was about to come up the road straight at him, riding on tank tracks, in the worst winter Belgium had seen in years. He did not know any of that yet. None of them did. On the night of the 17th of December, Pop's unit was pulled back from its work and told to grab everything and move fast west, away from a front that was supposed to be quiet and had suddenly turned into a flood. Trucks loaded in the dark, men who had been told nothing now whispered everything, and the whispers were ugly. Rumors of German tanks where no German tanks should be, rumors of whole American units gone. And one rumor worse than all the others, a rumor that turned out to be true, that the day before, the Germans had taken a group of captured American soldiers, herded them into a snowy field near a town called Malmedy, and shot them down in cold blood. The boys went quiet when they heard that one, even the loud ones. The men they were running from did not take prisoners. That changed how a man thought about getting caught. Pop did not say much. He sat in the back of a cold truck in the dark, his old rifle across his knees, his stiff fingers checking the bolt by feel, the way he always did. The boy next to him, 18 years old and shaking from the cold or from fear, looked at the rifle and out of nervous habit made the old joke, "That museum gun gonna save us, Pop." Pop looked out the back of the truck at the dark road sliding away behind them. Somewhere out there in the snow, tanks were coming. He worked the bolt once slow and let it close. "We'll see," he said. He did not know it, but in a few hours, the truck would stop at a small stone bridge over a small frozen river on a back road in the woods. He did not know that an order would come down that needed a steady hand and a cold head and a man willing to be the last one standing. He did not know that by the next morning, every young man around him would be gone from that bridge, and only the old one would be left. And he did not know the most important thing of all. He did not know that the slow, stubborn, one-shot-at-a-time rifle they all laughed at was about to become the single most dangerous thing on that road. The truck rolled on into the dark. Ahead in the trees, the bridge was waiting. The trucks found the bridge in the dark. It was a small thing. A stone bridge, old, maybe 100 years old, built long before anyone thought a tank would ever need to cross it. It ran maybe 20 meters across a narrow river that had frozen at the edges and still ran black and fast down the middle. The road came down out of the pine woods on the east side, crossed the bridge, and climbed away west into more woods. That was all it was, a back road, a shortcut. The kind of crossing nobody marks on a big map, but Pop's officer had a map, and on his map this little bridge was circled in pencil. Because a back road is exactly what a man in a hurry wants. The main roads were jammed and watched and blown. A spearhead racing for the river, burning fuel by the minute, looking for any way west the big roads would not give him. Would take a quiet back road bridge in a heartbeat. Every crossing papers tanks could not use cost him an hour, and a tank of fuel he did not have. Every crossing they could use was a door thrown open straight at the river, so the order came down at 3:20 in the morning. And it was the order engineers were trained for, deny the bridge, but there was a catch, and the catch is the whole story. They could not blow it yet, not right away, because they were not the last Americans east of that river. Behind them, somewhere back in the dark woods, pieces of broken American units were still coming. stragglers, a few trucks, men on foot, who had been overrun 2 days ago and were walking west through the snow trying to find their own army again, wounded men. If the engineers dropped the bridge into the river now, tonight, they would save themselves and seal off the only easy way home for every one of those men. They would leave them on the wrong side of the water with the German tanks. So the order had two parts, and the second part was the cruel one. Hold the bridge open, let your own people cross, and the moment the enemy comes, not 1 second before, blow it in his face. This was the job all up and down the line that week. Small groups of engineers at small crossings, waiting in the cold with their hands on the wire. Trying to thread an impossible needle, wait too long and the tanks roll across before you can drop it, and the door to the river is wide open. Blow too early and you murder your own stragglers, and maybe blow it before it even mattered. The whole thing came down to timing and nerve, and one man's judgment about the exact right second to end it. They got to work in the dark. The young engineers did the heavy part, and they were good at it, and Pop watched them do it with quiet respect. They placed the charges low, against the stone supports under the bridge, where the weight of the whole span pressed down. They ran the wire back from the charges, away from the bridge, to a low spot behind the stone wall on the west bank, where a man could lie down out of the worst of the fire and still reach the firing handle. They worked fast and they worked cold, their breath hanging white in the dark, their fingers raw. By 4:40, the bridge was ready to die. All it needed was a hand on the handle and the will to push it down. The officer in charge was a young lieutenant named Hadley, 24 years old, serious. He set his men in a half circle around the west end of the bridge, behind the wall, behind a few rocks, in a ditch. He had maybe a dozen men, a couple of the new automatic rifles, a single bazooka with a handful of rockets, and a lot of nervous quiet. They were engineers, not infantry. They built things. Tonight they had to be soldiers, and they all knew the difference. The lieutenant came down the line in the dark, checking on each man, and he came to Pop last. Pop was lying behind the low stone wall with his old Springfield, and he was doing the thing he always did, cleaning it. Working the bolt, checking it by feel in the dark, because in the dark feel is all you have. Mercer, the lieutenant said, "Sir, you're my demolition man. When the time comes, you blow it." He nodded at the firing handle by Pop's elbow. "Not before I say, not after the first tank's tracks are on the deck. You wait for my word." "Yes, sir," the lieutenant paused. He looked at the old man and the old rifle in the dark, and for just a second the doubt showed on his young face. Of all the men he had to leave on a firing handle that needed perfect timing and a steady nerve, he had the old fellow, the mascot, the one the men laughed at. He almost said something, then he caught himself, because you do not say a thing like that to a man right before a fight. "Just be ready, Pop," he said instead, and moved on. Pop did not answer. He looked at the firing handle. He looked east, into the dark where the road came out of the trees, and he settled in to wait. This is a good place to tell you who he was, because the waiting was long. And because by the end of this, you are going to want to have known him. Walter Mercer was born in 1895. He grew up on a farm, the kind of place where a boy learns to shoot before he learns to drive. Because shooting put meat on the table and there was no driving to be done, he was a good shot as a boy, quiet about it. Some men brag. Pop just hit what he aimed at and said nothing, the way a man says nothing about something that has always come easy. He went to the First War at 23. He went into the trenches in France in 1918, into the mud and the wire and the gas. And he saw the things men saw there, the things they came home and did not talk about. He carried a Springfield rifle in that war, the same kind he carried now. He learned to shoot it the slow, patient, deadly way the old marksman taught. Breathe, settle, squeeze, never jerk, one careful shot at a time. And he learned the thing that no drill teaches and no medal records. He learned how to be calm when calm makes no sense. He learned how to lie still and wait while the world came apart around him. Then the war ended and he came home and he put the rifle in a closet and became a regular man for 25 years. He married, he worked, he grew older. He read the newspapers, and the newspapers got worse, and then the Second War came and started swallowing other people's sons by the boatload. A man his age was supposed to stay home. Pop could not do it. He never explained it well, even to himself. Part of it was that he knew. He knew what those boys were walking into, because he had walked into it once, and he could not sit in a warm kitchen and read about it. Part of it was simpler and harder to say. He had been good at exactly one terrible thing in his life, a long time ago, and his country needed that terrible thing again. And he was not ready to admit he was too old to give it, so he went back, and the army, sensible as ever, looked at the gray in his mustache and the limp in his knee, and decided the kindest thing was to keep him far from the shooting. They made him an engineer, they sent him to the rear, and for 4 long months in Europe the plan worked. He built and he fixed and he carried his old rifle, and he did not fire it once, and the boys laughed at the museum gun, and he let them. In 4 months at war, Walter Mercer had not fired a single shot at the enemy. He was about to make up for it. The cold got worse as the night wore on toward dawn. It got into everything. The men behind the wall stopped feeling their feet. A thick fog rolled down the river valley, which was bad 2 ways. It hid the road so they could not see what was coming until it was almost on top of them. And it grounded the planes. In good weather, American aircraft could find a German column on a road and tear it apart. In this fog, no plane was coming for anyone. There would be no help from the sky. Whatever came up that road, the dozen cold men at the bridge would have to handle it themselves. Around 5:30, the first of their own people came across. It started with a sound in the fog, and every rifle in the half-circle swung toward it, and a thin, scared voice called out the password before anyone fired, "Thank God." Then they came out of the dark. A handful of American soldiers, filthy, exhausted, half-frozen, some of them wounded, men who had been running west through the woods for 2 days. They stumbled across the bridge, one small group at a time. And the engineers waved them through and pointed them up the west road toward the rest of the army. And the stragglers did not even stop to ask who these men were. They just crossed the water and kept walking west, away from the thing behind them. For an hour they trickled across in the fog, 2s and 3s, a truck with no headlights. 2 men carrying a third on a door they had torn off its hinges. Every one of them was a reason the bridge could not be blown yet. Every one of them was alive because a dozen cold engineers were holding a crossing open in the dark. And then near 6:30 the trickle stopped. The fog went quiet, no more passwords, no more footsteps. The last of them was across, or the last of them was never going to make it. And in the new silence, the men behind the wall heard a different sound come up the valley from the east. Not footsteps, not a single straggling truck, engines, heavy engines. The deep, grinding, unmistakable sound of tracked vehicles, a lot of them, working their way up the road through the fog toward the bridge. Pop heard it and went still. He had heard the sound of an enemy coming before, a long time ago, and the body remembers. He put his hand flat on the cold firing handle. He looked east into the gray fog where the road came out of the trees. The lieutenant, 20 meters down the wall, raised his head and listened, and even in the dark you could see his face change. The Germans had found the back road. At 6:40 in the morning on the 18th of December, the first shape pushed out of the fog at the far end of the bridge. A German half-track full of men feeling its way forward, behind it more shapes, the grind of a tank. voices calling to each other in a language none of the engineers spoke. The enemy had arrived, and the enemy did not know yet that the bridge was wired. And the lieutenant's whole job now was to wait for the exact right second. Let them commit to the crossing and drop the span out from under them. He did not get the chance. Because the Germans were not stupid, and they did not just drive blind onto a strange bridge in the fog. They stopped short. They put men down on foot. And one of those men, a German with sharp eyes, saw something he did not like: a glint of wire, a shape behind the far wall. The wrongness of a crossing left standing in their path when every other crossing had been blown. He shouted, and the calm gray morning came apart all at once. A German machine gun opened up across the river and raked the west bank. And the fight for the bridge began in a single second, before anyone was ready. The way these things always do, the first burst killed the man next to Pop. The second knocked the lieutenant down in the snow, and he did not get up. And in the time it takes to say it, the careful plan, the timing, the word that was supposed to come, all of it was gone. The officer who was supposed to give the order to blow the bridge was lying still in the snow. The dozen men in the half-circle were being torn at by fire they could not answer, engineers caught in an infantry fight they were never built for. And one by one and two by two, they did the only thing left to do. They broke. They pulled back off the wall, dragging their wounded, falling back west up the road into the trees, away from the guns. Because to stay was to die, and there was no officer left to tell them otherwise. And then there was one. When the smoke thinned and the snow settled, there was one man still at the bridge. One man still lying behind the low stone wall on the west bank, with a damaged firing handle that would no longer blow anything. A dead lieutenant 6 feet away, and a column of German armor stopped at the far end of a bridge that was still, somehow, standing. One old man, one old rifle, and a crossing that, if the Germans took it intact, opened the road to the river. He had not fired a shot in this entire war. He worked the bolt on the Springfield once, slow, and the old rifle closed with a sound like a key turning in a lock. If you want to see what one old man does against a column of tanks with 4 months of held breath and a rifle they all laughed at, this is the part to hit the like button for. Do it now because it's about to start, then come right back to the bridge, because Pop Mercer just raised the museum gun back to the bridge. It is 6:43 in the morning. The lieutenant is dead in the snow. The other engineers are gone into the woods behind him. The firing handle that was supposed to drop the bridge into the river is smashed, useless, a tangle of bent metal and torn wire. Walter Mercer is alone on the west bank of a small river in Belgium, behind a low stone wall. And across that river is a German armored column that wants the bridge in front of him. He cannot blow it, so he has to do the only other thing. He has to make sure nobody crosses it. Now, you might be asking the obvious question. One old man with a slow rifle that fires one shot at a time, against tanks, how does that even begin to work? Tanks have machine guns, tanks have cannons, tanks are tanks. What can a single rifleman do? Here is the answer, and it is the whole reason this story exists. A tank cannot just charge across a strange bridge. Think about what that bridge looks like to the Germans. A narrow stone crossing, left standing, when every other bridge for miles has been dropped into a river right in their faces. To a careful commander, a bridge left standing is not a gift, it is a trap. It might be wired to blow the second a tank rolls onto it. It might be mined. There might be men with anti-tank weapons waiting in the rocks on the far side, ready to put a rocket into the soft side of the first tank that commits. A tank that drives blind onto a crossing like that can die in a Single second and cork the whole road behind it with 20 tons of dead steel. So you do not send the tank first, you send men first. You put infantry down on foot, and you send them across to clear the bridge and the far bank. To find the wires, to kill the men hiding in the rocks, to make the crossing safe. Only when the men have cleared it do you trust your tanks to roll. This is exactly what was happening all over the Ardennes that week. The German tanks were fast and powerful, but again and again. Small groups of Americans at small crossings forced them to stop, dismount, and fight on foot for every bridge. Every time they had to do that, they burned the one thing the whole attack could not spare: time. And the fuel that ran out with every idling minute. So here is what Pop understood, lying behind that wall, that the boys who laughed at his rifle never could have. He did not have to beat the tanks. He just had to keep the men off the bridge. If no German on foot could cross that narrow stone span, then no German commander would risk his tanks on it. As long as one rifleman could make the bridge deadly to walk across, the whole column behind it was stuck. One old man with a steady hand could freeze a spearhead in place, not by destroying it, but by making 20 meters of stone too expensive to cross. That was the bet. Now he had to make it true. He checked his ammunition first, because an old soldier checks his ammunition before anything else. He had his rifle loaded, 5 rounds and a few clips on his belt, 50, maybe 60 rounds in all. That was nothing. That would not last an hour against a determined push. But then his eye went to the dead, and the old man did a cold piece of arithmetic that the young ones could not have done. The new rifles, the Garens the boys carried, and laughed about his not having, they fired the exact same cartridge his old Springfield did. The same bullet, the same brass. Every dead engineer in the snow, every abandoned position, was a little pile of ammunition his museum gun could use. The rifle they mocked could eat off the bodies of the modern ones. He would have to crawl out to get it, out of cover, into the open, every time. He filed that away and turned back to the bridge, because across the river, the Germans had decided the position was beaten, and it was time to walk across and prove it. A small group of them stood up at the far end of the bridge. 6 men, maybe 8, in the gray morning fog, rifles ready, getting set to rush the crossing and clear it. The way they had cleared a dozen others, they had seen the Americans break and run. They thought the bank in front of them was empty now. They thought the last defender had pulled back into the trees with the rest. They thought wrong by one. Pop settled the old rifle on top of the low wall. He breathed out slow, the way the dead men of another war had taught him. He found the lead man in his sights, the one waving the others forward, the one whose job it was to step onto the bridge first. He squeezed, he did not jerk, he squeezed. The Springfield kicked against his shoulder, an old familiar weight. And across the river, the lead man folded into the snow, and the careful gray morning broke open with the flat, hard crack of a single rifle. Then Pop did the thing the old marksman taught, the thing the slow rifle makes you do whether you like it or not. He worked the bolt by hand, up, back, forward, down 1 round, and the spent brass spun away steaming into the snow. And a new round seated in the chamber, and before the Germans across the river had even decided where the shot came from, the second man was in his sights. Crack, bolt, the second man went down. Now they knew the bank was not empty. Now they scattered, diving for the snow, shouting, swinging their rifles toward the west wall, hunting for the gun, and the slow museum rifle that needed a full second of handwork between every shot. The rifle they all said would get them killed was suddenly the only thing in the world that mattered. Crack, bolt, a third man who had not gotten down fast enough. It is 6:51 in the morning. 3 Germans are down in the snow at the east end of the bridge. The crossing, which a moment ago was about to be walked across, is now a place no man wants to be. And on the West Bank, a 49-year-old engineer who had not fired a shot in 4 months of war has fired 4 and hit 3. The held breath of those 4 months was gone. He was a marksman again. He had never really stopped being one. But here is where the old man's other skill came in, the one that does not show up in any story about a good shot, the one that actually keeps a lone defender alive. Because firing from one spot, twice, 3 times, tells the enemy exactly where you are, and the enemy across that river had machine guns. And the moment they fixed his position, they would pour so much fire into that one spot behind the wall that no man could lift his head from it, let alone work a bolt and aim. A lone rifleman who stays put is a dead rifleman, so you do not stay put, you fire and you move, fire and move. The old soldiers had a name for it, and Pop had learned it in the mud of 1918. Shoot, then shift, never give them the same target twice. So the second the Germans started hunting his muzzle flash, Pop was already gone sliding low along the back of the stone wall on his elbows and knees, dragging the rifle. His soaked coat hissing across the frozen ground, moving 10 meters down the bank to a new gap in the wall before he came up again. The machine gun, when it finally opened up, tore into the spot he had just left. Chips of stone and snow blew off the wall where he had been 30 seconds before. He was not there anymore. He came up at the new spot, found a German who had risen to advance behind the machine gun's cover and dropped him. Crack. Then he was moving again before the gun could swing, down the wall the other way now, popping up somewhere new. And here is the part that saved his life and froze the whole column, to the Germans across the river in the fog. With a single careful rifle, firing from a different spot, every time it did not look like one man. It looked like a line. It looked like a squad of riflemen dug in along the West Bank, spread out behind the wall, each one taking his shot. Why would they think it was one defender? One defender does not appear in 4 places. One defender does not stop a squad's advance and keep stopping it. They were sure they were facing a held position, a real defense, maybe a dozen men with rifles in good cover. There was one. One man moving fast in the snow between shots, doing the work of 12. So the Germans did what you do against a held position. They got cautious. They stopped trying to rush the bridge on foot. They put their own riflemen down in the snow on the far bank to trade shots. And they brought their machine guns up to hose the west wall and pin the defenders down. They settled in for a real little battle for the crossing, which was exactly, precisely, what Pop wanted. Because every minute the Germans spent fighting for this nothing bridge on this nothing back road was a minute their tanks sat idle on the road behind them, with their engines running and their fuel burning. The whole spearhead was a clock counting down to empty, and the old man was making them spend it here, on him, 20 meters of stone at a time. He did not know the big picture. He did not know he was one tiny pin in a battle that stretched for 50 miles. He only knew the lieutenant was dead, and the order had been to hold the bridge, and he was holding it. It is 7:10. The fight settles into a grinding back and forth across the river. German machine guns rake the wall. Pop fires, moves, choosing his shots, never wasting one, dropping any man who tries to crawl forward to the bridge. He keeps a running count in his head, the way he counts everything: rounds fired, rounds left, men he had stopped. Time passing by the gray light, slowly strengthening in the fog. Every part of him is cold past the point of feeling. His hands work the bolt by memory now, not by sensation, because sensation is gone. And the ammunition is going, faster than men are falling. That is the cruel math of a one-man fight. He fires more than he hits, because he has to fire to keep them down. And every round that keeps a man's head in the snow is a round he will never get back. By 7:25 he is low, dangerously low, a clip and a half on his belt, maybe a dozen rounds, and the Germans are not going anywhere. He knows what he has to do, and he hates it. He looks back, away from the bridge, to the dead engineer lying in the open 10 meters behind him. The boy who fell at the very start, the one who had a full belt of clips and never got to use them, same cartridge, same bullet. A whole new fight lying there in the snow, but to reach it, Pop has to leave the wall. He has to crawl out into the open. Away from his cover, across ground the German machine guns can see, with his back to the river and the enemy, to rob the dead. He waits for the next long burst to chew up the wall to his left. The second the gun swings that way, he goes up and out from behind the wall, scrambling low across the open snow toward the body, every nerve in him screaming, the back of his neck waiting for the bullet. Halfway there in the open, with no cover and no rifle up, a German across the river saw the old man move. And the machine gun started to swing back toward him. The bullet did not come. Pop reached the dead engineer 1 second before the machine gun found him. He felt the snow kick up behind his boots as he rolled the last body length into the shallow dip where the boy had fallen, and then the burst hammered past, low and flat, where his legs had just been. He pressed his face into the cold ground beside the dead man and lay still while the gun chewed the snow around them both. And he made himself small and he waited. The gun gave up. It always does. A machine gun cannot fire forever. And the man behind it had other targets he thought were more important, ghosts of riflemen all along that wall. Pop went to work without lifting his head. The dead boy had a full belt. Clips of ammunition for the new rifle, the Garand, 8 rounds to a clip. And the boy had carried plenty and used none of them. Here is the small, hard truth the old man already knew. He could use the bullets, he could not use the clips. The new rifle's clips did not fit his old bolt gun. He could not just slap them in. He had to take each clip and strip the bullets out of it by hand, one at a time. In the freezing cold, with fingers that no longer felt anything, and load them into his own rifle the old way, thumbing them down into the magazine. It was slow, of course it was slow. Everything about the old man's war was slow, but slow and loaded beats fast and empty. And in 2 minutes of careful, cold, hidden work, Walter Mercer turned a dead boy's wasted ammunition into another 40 rounds for the museum gun. Then he had to get back. He did not crawl back the way he came. An old soldier never returns by the same road he left on. Because the enemy is watching that road now. He went the other way, low, sliding along behind a fold in the ground. Coming back up to the stone wall 30 meters from where he had left it, at a spot the Germans were not watching. He settled in behind the wall, loaded, breathing, alive, and he looked at this bridge. It is 7:40 in the morning. He has held the crossing for 1 hour. And across the river, the Germans have stopped trying to walk over it. That, by itself, was a kind of victory, and a dangerous one. Because the enemy was not stupid, and the enemy was learning. They had sent men at the bridge on foot, and the bridge had killed them. So they stopped. A good soldier does not keep doing the thing that gets him killed. He changes. And when the enemy changes, the fight changes, and the man who was winning a minute ago has to win all over again, against something new. The first change was the fire. It got worse and it got smarter. More machine guns came up to the far bank. And now, instead of hunting one muzzle flash, they worked the whole west wall in. A steady, grinding pattern, left to right and back again, never letting any spot rest. The idea was simple: pin every defender down, make it so no rifleman could lift his head long enough to aim. If you cannot kill the men in the wall, you bury them under so much fire that they cannot fire back. And then you walk across while their heads are down. Pop felt the change at once. The window to come up, find a target, and shoot got smaller and smaller. He had to time it now, come up only in the half-second gap when the sweeping gun was pointed somewhere else, take one shot, and drop before the gun came back. Up, crack, down, move, up, crack, down, move. The work got harder and the cost got higher and the margin got thinner. But the wall held because he made the bridge cost more than it was worth, and a careful commander will not pay. So the enemy made the second change, and this one was the one that nearly ended him. If you cannot go through a defender, you go around him. This is the oldest move in war, and it is the thing every lone defender fears most in the world. A man behind a wall facing forward can hold a narrow front against a crowd, but he has sides, he has a back. And if the enemy can get even one or two men around to his flank off to the side, where the wall does not protect him, where he is looking the wrong way, then the whole position falls apart in seconds. The wall stops mattering, the choke point stops mattering, a flanked man is a finished man. The Germans knew it, so while the machine guns kept Pop's head down at the bridge, they sent men to find another way across the river. The river was the old man's shield. This is the entire reason bridges decided that whole battle. A river is a wall that water makes, and an army on one side cannot simply step over to the other. As long as the only way across was the bridge in front of him, Pop only had one direction to guard. But a river is not a perfect wall. It bends, it runs shallow in places. There are fords, spots where a man on foot, soaked to the chest and freezing, can wade across if he is brave enough and the enemy is busy enough. Somewhere downstream in the fog, German soldiers were walking the bank, looking for a place to cross. And Pop, pinned at the bridge by the sweeping guns, his head down behind the wall, did not see them go. This is the moment the old man should have died. Pinned in front, flanked on the side, an old engineer alone with a slow rifle against men who had finally figured out how to beat him. By every rule of war, it was over. It was a sound that saved him, a small one. Between the bursts of the machine guns, in the gray cold, Pop heard a noise. That did not belong, not the grind of engines, not the hammer of the guns. A thinner sound downstream and to his right, off to the flank, the crack and splash of ice breaking, the sound of someone going into water. Every alarm in the old man's body went off at once. He had heard that exact category of sound before, a lifetime ago, in another war, the sound of men trying to move where they should not be. And his mind did the thing that decades of survival builds into a man. It put the picture together in half a second. The guns at the bridge were not really trying to kill him anymore. They were keeping him looking forward. The real attack was off to the side, in the water coming for his flank. He had been played. And here is the thing the boys who laughed at him never understood about him. Old soldier, it was not that he was stronger than them or faster. He was not. It was that he had seen this before. He knew the trick because the trick was old, and he was old, and the two of them had met a long time ago. Pop did not panic. Panic was for young men. He moved. He left the bridge. It was the hardest decision of the morning, and he made it in a single breath. To leave the front of the bridge unwatched was to risk everything. But to keep watching the bridge while men crossed the river behind him was to die for certain, so he chose. He slid back from the wall and crawled fast along the fold in the ground, away from the crossing toward the sound of breaking ice downstream to meet the flank before the flank met him. He came up behind a thick stump at the river's edge, and through the fog he saw them, 3 German soldiers in the water. Up to their chests in the freezing black river, rifles held over their heads, fighting the current, fighting the cold, halfway across almost to his bank. 3 men who, in another 60 seconds, would have come up out of the water behind the old man at the bridge and shot him in the back. He had the high bank, he had the cover. He had them in the open in the water, the worst place a soldier can be, with nowhere to hide and no firm ground to fight from. Pop settled the rifle on the stump. He breathed out slow. He did what he had to do. He did it the way he did everything, one careful shot at a time, and when it was finished, the river ran on the way rivers do. And the flank was closed, and the old man was still alive. He did not feel good about it. There is nothing to feel good about, doing that to men trapped in cold water. He had done it because the other choice was his own death and the loss of the bridge. He let himself feel it for exactly 1 second, the weight of it, the men he had just stopped. Then he put it down because a soldier in a fight cannot carry it and fight at the same time. And he crawled back toward the bridge to face whatever came next. It is 8:15 in the morning, and by now something had changed on the German side of the river too, not in their tactics, in their understanding. Because 3 men had gone into that water to flank a held position, and all 3 had been stopped, fast, by careful fire. By someone who had not been at the bridge a moment before and was at the flank when it mattered. A whole defending squad does not move like that. A squad has men assigned to the front and men assigned to the flank, and they stay put. What had just happened? The bridge guarded, then the flank guarded, by what seemed to be. The same deadly, patient gun did not look like a squad anymore. It looked like one man, one very good man. A man who was everywhere because he had to be, who left the front to save his flank because there was no one else to do it. Somewhere across that river, a German began to suspect the truth, and he was the kind of soldier who, once he suspected it, wanted to test it himself. He was a marksman. Every good infantry unit had a man chosen for his eye. And his patients given a rifle with a scope, whose job was not to spray and pin, but to wait and watch and kill the one target that mattered with one shot. He was the German mirror of the old man, young where Pop was old, modern where Pop was a relic, but the same animal underneath. A hunter, a man who killed slow and careful, one shot at a time. And he had decided the gun on the West Bank belonged to a single defender, and he meant to find that defender and end him. The machine guns went quiet. That was the first thing Pop noticed, and it frightened him more than the guns ever had. When a battlefield goes quiet, it does not mean the danger is gone. It means the danger has changed shape. The sweeping fire stopped, the crossing went still, and in the new silence Pop knew the way an old hunter knows when the woods go quiet, that something was now watching him specifically. Hunting him, waiting for him to make the one mistake. He came up to take a shot, the way he had 100 times that morning, fast, at a German he saw moving near the bridge. The German across the river fired first. The bullet struck the top of the stone wall, a hand's width from Pop's face. Not a wild burst from a machine gun. A single perfect, aimed shot, placed exactly where his head had been, by a man who had been waiting for it. Chips of stone tore his cheek. He dropped behind the wall with his heart slamming and blood running cold down the side of his face. And he understood all at once what he was now up against. This was no longer engineers against a confused enemy. This was no longer a delay. This was a duel, one marksman against another, one hunter against another. The young German with the modern scoped rifle and the old American with the museum gun, separated by a frozen river and 20 meters of stone, each one waiting for the other to show 1 inch too much. And the old man, bleeding into the snow behind the wall, knew the terrible truth of that kind of fight. In a duel between 2 patient men, you do not get a second mistake. The first man to be seen is the first man to die. He wiped the blood out of his eye. He worked the bolt slow and silent and chambered around. And he began, very carefully, to hunt the man who was hunting him. Walter Mercer lay behind the stone wall with blood freezing on the side of his face and made himself understand what had just happened. That shot was not random. It was not a machine gun spraying the wall and getting lucky. It was one bullet placed by one eye exactly where his head had been. In the half-second his head was there. A man across that river had been waiting for him, watching one spot, patient as death. And the only reason Pop was still alive was that he had ducked a breath sooner than the German squeezed. He knew this kind of man because he was this kind of man. So let me tell you how this fight works, because it is not like the fight that came before. And it is the most dangerous game 2 soldiers can play. When a machine gun is hunting you, the danger is noise and weight of fire. You keep your head down and you wait it out. But when a single marksman is hunting you, the danger is one shot you never hear coming, and the cruel rule of that game is simple. The first man to be seen is the first man to die. Here is why. A rifle, when it fires, gives you away. It makes a flash. In the cold air, it makes a little puff of smoke. It makes a sound that tells a trained ear roughly where you are. So the moment you take your shot, you have told your enemy where you are hiding, and if he is good, and he is ready. His bullet is already on its way back to that spot before your smoke has cleared. This is the whole reason a real marksman lives by concealment and patience above all else. You do not fire unless the shot is worth giving away your hiding place. And the second after you fire, you move, because the place you fired from is now the most dangerous place in the world. Pop had been doing exactly that all morning without thinking about it. Fire and move, fire and move. The slow old rifle had forced the habit into him decades ago, and the habit had kept him alive against a dozen guns. Now it was about to be tested against one. And there was a second thing the old man knew, a thing most people get wrong about marksmen. They almost never work alone. A good marksman usually has a partner. One man shoots. The other man watches, finds the targets, spots where the enemy's fire is coming from, tells the shooter where to look. Two sets of eyes, two men, hidden together, hunting as one. So Pop had to assume the bullet that grazed him came from a team. One rifle, yes, but two pairs of eyes across that river, working together looking for him. That made it worse, much worse. One hunter you can sometimes outwait. Two, who can switch off and rest their eyes and cover each other's blind spots, are a different problem. Pop did the only thing there was to do. He went still, not down, not hiding with his eyes shut. Still the deep, patient, total stillness of an old hunter who has waited out deer in cold woods for 50 years. He found a gap low in the wall. A crack between two stones at ground level, where he could see the far bank without lifting his head above the line. The German was watching. He laid the old Springfield through it, the slow, precise rifle that had been a marksman's tool in his war and was a marksman's tool still. And he watched, and he did not move at all. This is the part of the morning that does not look like a war movie. There were long minutes where nothing happened, where the loudest thing in the world was the river. Where an old man lay in the snow and breathed and waited. And let his enemy wait too, two patient men on two banks of a frozen river, each. One staring at the other's side of the world, each one refusing to be the first to move. And the cold tried to kill him while he waited. Here is a thing about the cold that morning that you would never think of until your life depended on it. When you breathe in freezing air, your breath comes out as a white cloud. You have seen it 1,000 times. It rises, it hangs. And to a man across a river who is hunting for where you are hidden, a little cloud of white breath rising above a stone wall. Again and again in the same spot is a sign that says, "Here, a man is here, breathing." So Pop could not even breathe like a normal man. He turned his face down into his own collar, into the snow under the wall. And he let each breath leak out slow and warm against the wet wool, against the cold ground. So that no telltale white cloud rose above the stones to mark him. Breathe. In slow through the nose, breathe out slow and down into the earth, again, again. His face was numb, his cheek had bled, and the blood had frozen into a stiff dark line down his jaw. Snow had begun to settle on the back of his coat, and his helmet, light and silent. Until the old man lying against the gray stone in the gray snow was barely a shape at all. Just a still part of the cold ground, breathing into the dirt so the cold would not give him away. That is what holding a bridge actually looks like. Not a hero standing tall, an old man melting into the snow, controlling his own breath, refusing to die 1 minute at a time. Then across the river, the Germans offered him a gift, a soldier stood up, not far back, not under cover. Out in the open, near the bank, in clear view. A German rifleman, standing almost carelessly, as if he had forgotten there was a deadly gun on the other side of the water, an easy shot, a clean shot. The kind of shot Pop had taken all morning without a second thought. The man stood there in the open, the perfect target, practically asking for it. Pop's finger touched the trigger. And then every instinct the old man had, every cold year in the woods, every long-dead lesson from the last war, screamed one word at him. No, because something was wrong. The target was too good. The man was too exposed. No soldier who had watched his friends get cut down at this bridge all morning would stand up in the open like that, careless, easy, unless he had been told to. Unless his job was to stand there and be a target, unless he was bait. And in the half-second Pop's mind took to understand it, the whole trap opened up in front of him like a door. They wanted him to shoot. That standing man was a sacrifice, offered up on purpose. The moment Pop fired at him, Pop's rifle would flash, his breath and smoke would rise, the sound would mark him. And the real hunter, the marksman with the scope, hidden somewhere Pop could not see, lying still and patient just like Pop, would finally know exactly where the old American was. And his next bullet would not miss. The standing man was not a target. He was a question the Germans were asking. And the answer they wanted was Pop's muzzle flash. The smart play, the only play, was the hardest thing in the world to do. He did not shoot. He let the gift go. He let the easy target stand there. He took his finger off the trigger and went still again, stiller than before. And he turned his eyes away from the man they wanted him to look at, and he began, slowly, to search the places they did not want him to look. The shadows, the tree line, the folds in the ground on the far bank where a patient man would hide to watch a baited kill. It took everything he had. Every cell of an old soldier's pride wanted to take the shot. He did not. He searched. And after a long, long moment, he found it. There at the edge of the trees on the far bank low, in a place a careless eye would slide right past. A shape that was a little too still, a line that was a little too straight to be a branch. And once, just once, when the gray light shifted, the faintest wink of something that should not be in a forest, glass. The lens of a scope turned just enough to catch the light. The hunter lying exactly as Pop was lying, watching the bait, waiting for the old man to be foolish. Found you. Now it was Pop's game. He did not rush it. He had not rushed anything in 50 years, and he was not going to start with his life on the line. He settled the old rifle a hair's width at a time, breathing down into the snow, lining the iron sights of his slow museum gun. Onto that one too still shape at the edge of the trees, he let the standing bait keep standing. He let the German marksman keep waiting for a flash that was never going to come from where the German expected. And he waited for the one thing he needed, for the hunter to move. A hidden man can stay still for a long time, but not forever. Eventually the cold gets into him too. Eventually he shifts, just a little, to ease a cramped arm, to clear his eye, to look harder for the prey that has gone too quiet. And when the German marksman finally moved, when that too still shape shifted, just slightly, just once, to find the old man who had refused the bait, Pop fired one shot, one careful, patient, 50 years in the making shot from a rifle they all said belonged in a museum. The too still shape at the edge of the trees stopped being a problem, and here is the thing that should sit with you. The standing bait, the easy target, never got shot at all. Pop never gave them the flash they wanted. The Germans had built a perfect trap to find a single hidden rifleman. And the single hidden rifleman had been hunting men since before half of them were born. And he had looked at their trap and seen straight through it and killed the hunter. Instead of the bait, the young scope versus the old eye, and the old eye won. It is 9:05 in the morning. Pop did not celebrate. There was no one to celebrate with, and nothing about it felt good, and the morning was far from over. He slid back from the gap, moved down the wall in case the dead marksman had a partner still watching. And only when he was sure no second bullet was coming did he let himself breathe like a man again. One real cloud of white breath rising at last into the cold. Then he counted his bullets, because an old soldier always counts his bullets. He had used more than he wanted. Between the first fight and the duel and the long cold game, the scavenged rounds were going. He laid them out in his mind, maybe 30 left between his belt and the gun. 30, it had felt like plenty an hour ago. It did not feel like plenty now. And he knew, with the cold, clear arithmetic of a man who has done this. Before, that 30 was a number that only goes one direction, and that direction is down. That was his clock, his own private countdown, ticking toward empty, one careful shot at a time. But there was another clock, a bigger one, that Pop could not see and would never fully understand, and it was ticking against the Germans. Because every minute that column spent stopped at this miserable little bridge, fighting one stubborn old man, was a minute their tanks sat with their engines running and their fuel burning away. The whole charge to the river was a race against an empty fuel tank, and the old man, without knowing it, was winning that race for the entire American army, 20 meters of stone at a time. 2 clocks, his running down toward 30, toward 20, toward the 4 bullets he would have at the end. There's running down toward an empty tank and a column going nowhere. Whichever clock hit 0 first would decide everything. Pop wiped the frozen blood from his face, worked the bolt slow and quiet, and looked east across the bridge to see what the enemy would try next. For a moment, nothing. The far bank went quiet, the fire stopped, the shapes pulled back into the fog in the trees, and the gray morning settled into a stillness so complete that the old man almost let himself believe the worst was behind him. Then from somewhere back in the fog, under the idling growl of the engines he had been hearing all morning, came a new sound, deeper, heavier. The grind of something much bigger turning onto the road and starting, slowly, to move toward the bridge. The Germans had decided they were done sending men. The heavy sound came up the road through the fog, and Walter Mercer knew what it was before he saw it. A tank. He lay behind the wall and felt the old cold fear that every foot soldier knows in his bones. Because this was the one thing he could not answer. He had stopped men, he had won the duel, he had held the bridge for more than 2 hours with a rifle and a cold head, but a rifle does not stop a tank. You can put every bullet you own into the front of a tank, and it will roll over you and never feel it. Steel does not care how good a shot you are. So when the shape pushed slowly out of the fog at the far end of the bridge, long gun first, tracks grinding, a wall of gray metal taller than a man, the old man's stomach went to ice. And for the first time all morning, he did not have a clean answer for what was in front of him. The tank stopped short of the bridge. And that right there was the thing that had kept Pop alive all morning, working one more time. The tank did not charge across. It could not, and its commander knew it could not. Because to that German tank commander, a narrow stone bridge left standing when every bridge for miles had been blown into its river was not a road, it was a question mark. Was it mined? Was it wired to blow the instant his tracks touched the deck? Was there a man with an anti-tank rocket waiting in the rocks on the far side to put a round into his flank the second he committed? All morning the same fear had been slowing this whole column to a crawl, forcing them to stop, to test, to bleed away the hours and the fuel they could not spare. A tank that rushes a trapped bridge dies on it and corks the road behind it with 20 tons of dead steel. No commander wanted to be the man who lost a tank on a nothing crossing on a back road. So the tank did what tanks do when they are unsure. It tried to flush the trap before it crossed. The long gun swung. There was a flash and a sound like the sky tearing, and a shell smashed into the tree line on Pop's side of the river, throwing up a fountain of dirt and splintered wood. Then another, walking along the far bank, hunting for the men the Germans were sure must be hiding there. The tank was firing blind into every spot a defender might be, trying to make someone flinch, trying to make someone shoot back and give himself away. And Pop, lying flat in the snow while the world came apart around him, did the hardest thing of all. He did not shoot. He did not move. He did not give the tank one single thing to aim at. He pressed himself into the cold ground and let the shells fall and the dirt rain down on his back, and he stayed silent. Because the moment he fired at that tank, he would tell it exactly where he was, and a rifle bullet would not save him from what came next. So he lay still under the shell fire, breathing into the snow, and he let the tank wonder. Let it fire into empty trees. Let it find nothing. Let it keep wondering whether the bridge was a trap, because an enemy who is wondering is an enemy who is not crossing. It went on like that for a long time, the tank shelling, probing, hunting, the old man invisible in the snow, refusing to answer. Two kinds of patience, grinding against each other in the fog, and then, slowly, the shelling stopped. The tank sat there at the end of the bridge, engine rumbling, and did nothing. A minute passed, two. Pop did not dare lift his head, but he could hear it, the great machine idling, thinking. And then he heard the sound he had been praying for without letting himself hope. The engine note changed, deepened. And the grinding of the tracks began again, but going the wrong way, backward. The tank was pulling back. He heard it reverse off the approach, heard it turn somewhere back in the fog, heard. The heavy sound began to fade away east, back up the road it had come from. And then the other engines, the ones that had been idling out there all morning, began to move too, not forward, not across, but away. The growl of the whole column shifting, turning, receding into the trees and the fog, getting quieter and quieter. Until the sound of the German spearhead was a low, far-off rumble. And then almost nothing, and then nothing at all. The firing stopped, the shouting stopped, the fog rolled gray and silent over the river. And it was over. Pop did not move for a long time, because a careful man does not trust a silence. But the minutes stretched on and nothing came, and slowly, finally, the old man let himself believe it. They had given up. He had done it. He had held the bridge. One man, one old rifle, and a crossing on a back road. And the whole German spearhead had broken its teeth on him and turned away to look for an easier road somewhere else. Whatever it had cost them in hours and fuel and men, they had decided this bridge was not worth one more minute, and they were gone. He lay in the snow and let it sink in. He thought of the lieutenant, young and serious, dead 6 feet away with his orders still in his mouth. He thought of the boys who had fled into the woods, who were maybe still alive somewhere west because the bridge behind them had held. He thought of the men who had laughed at his rifle, and he found, to his surprise, that he felt no satisfaction about being right, only tired. So tired, tired in a way that went past the cold, past the bones, into some place that had been holding tight since 6:40 that morning and could finally let go. An old man, too old to carry a rifle, and he had held a bridge alone against tanks and won and lived. He let his head rest against the cold stone. He let his eyes close just for a second, just for a second. And in that second of quiet, he heard a sound that made him freeze, not engines. The engines were gone, voices. Close, German voices, low, careful, near, coming not from across the river where the enemy was supposed to be, but from down by the water, near the bridge, on his side of the world. Pop's eyes snapped open, and every part of him went cold in a new and worse way, because in one terrible instant he understood the whole thing. And he understood that he had been beaten by the oldest trick of all, the one he had used himself 100 times. They had not given up. The tank pulling back, the column receding into the fog, the silence rolling in, none of it was surrender. All of it was bait. The same kind of bait they had offered him in the duel, only bigger, played across the whole battlefield. They had made it look like they were leaving so that the stubborn old defender would relax, would lower his guard, would believe it was over. And let his eyes close, just for a second. And while the tank made its noise pulling back to give the old man something to listen to, German infantry had slipped down off the road on foot, into the fog, down to the water's edge, and they were crossing, quietly by hand, at the bridge and maybe at a ford, creeping forward through the gray to clear the crossing the silent way. To find and finish the lone defender while he thought the war had moved on. And then, once the bridge was cleared by hand, the tank would come back out of the fog and roll across an open road. He had let his eyes close for 1 second, and in that second they had gotten close, too close, voices at the bridge close. The threat was no longer across the river. The threat was here, at the water, almost on top of him, and the old man had let it come. Pop did not panic. He had learned a long time ago, in mud just as cold as this snow. That panic is what kills the man who has run out of other mistakes to make. He had one breath to fix this, and he used it to think instead of to be afraid. He could not stay behind the wall. They knew the wall now. They had heard nothing from it for long minutes, and they would come at it sure of themselves, from the side. The way you take a position you think is empty. If he stayed where he was, the first German over the bank would be looking right down at him. So he did the last thing they would expect from a beaten old man. He moved toward them. Low and silent, the way the woods had taught him, he slid out from behind the wall and down the bank toward the water, toward the voices, into the fog. Putting himself off to the side of where they thought the defender was, in the broken ground, at the very foot of the bridge. If they were coming up out of the river expecting an empty bank, he would not be where their eyes went first. He would be low and to the side, and close enough to see them before they were ready. Close enough that their numbers and their tank could not help them in the half-second that decided everything. And from down there, pressed into the frozen mud at the base of the bridge, with his old rifle ready, and his heart slamming, and his breath held tight against the cold, he saw the first of them come up out of the fog. A German soldier, rifle low, stepping carefully up out of the shallows onto Pop's bank not 15 feet away, water streaming off his legs, his eyes up on the stone wall, where the trouble was supposed to be looking the wrong way, looking at where the old man had been. Never once looking down and to the side at where the old man actually was. Behind him, more shapes were coming up out of the water, 3, 4, more than Pop could count in the fog. The real assault, the smart one, the one that had nearly worked, was climbing up onto his bank right in front of him. And Walter Mercer, 59 rounds spent and his belt running light, lying in the freezing mud at the foot of the bridge he had held all morning, raised the museum rifle one more time and got ready to fight the closest, hardest fight of the whole long day. The one where the enemy was no longer a shape across a river, but a man close enough to see his face. He let the first German take one more step, then the bridge erupted. The bridge erupted, and for the next 90 seconds, Walter Mercer fought the closest fight of his life. He had the only thing that matters in a fight at 15 feet. He saw them before they saw him. The first German came up off the water looking at the wall, at the wrong place. And the old man fired from the mud at the base of the bridge. And the German went down before he ever found the gun. The second man turned toward the sound. And Pop was already working the bolt, already moving the rifle, and the second man fell too. Then the fog came alive with shouting and shapes, and the close, ugly chaos of men fighting at arm's length. And there was no patience left in it, no marksman's stillness, just speed and nerve, and an old rifle worked by hands that had done this before. He did not stay still now. Still gets you killed when they are this close. He fired and rolled and came up somewhere else and fired again. Low along the broken stone at the foot of the bridge, using the rocks, using the fog, using the one thing the Germans could not plan for. That the lone defender was not where he was supposed to be, and would not stand still to be killed. They had crossed expecting an empty bank or a beaten old man behind a wall. They found neither. They found a hunter in the mud who had been killing at this bridge for 2.5 hours and had not finished yet. It was not clean, it was not a war movie. It was cold and close and terrible. And when it was over, the men who had crossed the river by hand were down in the snow and the shallows or had thrown themselves back into the water to get away from the bank that would not die. And the old man was still there, chest heaving, soaked to the skin, alive. But the fight had cost him, and the cost was the one thing he could not get back. He pressed himself into the stone and counted his bullets, and his stomach dropped. Four rounds, that was all. The scavenged ammunition, the dead boy's clips, the careful arithmetic of a long morning, all of it spent. Down to 4 bullets rattling alone where a belt full used to be. He had started the day with a rifle they called a museum piece and a joke about throwing rocks when it ran dry. And now the joke was 4 bullets away from being true, and in the fog across the river, the engines were moving again. Not pulling back this time, coming forward, because the infantry had done its job. Even in dying it had crossed, it had tested the bank. And now the Germans believed the way was nearly clear. So they were sending the tank to finish it, to roll across the bridge. The foot soldiers had bled to open, and then the road to the river was theirs. 4 bullets, a tank. The old man knew exactly what 4 bullets do to a tank. Nothing. This is the moment the rifle could not save him. And this is the moment the museum gun stopped being the point of the story. Because Walter Mercer was not just a marksman, he was a marksman who had spent 4 months of this war as something the boys never took seriously, an engineer. A man whose actual trade, the thing the army had truly brought him back to do, was not shooting men, it was bringing down bridges. And this bridge, the one he had held all morning, the one the tank was about to cross, was already rigged to die. Cast your mind back to the dark before dawn, when the young engineers placed their charges low against the stone supports under the span, and ran the wire back to the firing handle behind the wall. Remember that the handle was smashed in the first seconds of the fight, that the wire was dead, that the bridge could no longer be blown the easy modern way with a push of a lever from cover. Everyone who fled into the woods had written this bridge off as unblowable for exactly that reason. The wire was dead, the handle was wrecked. There was no way to set it off, no modern way, but Walter Mercer had learned his trade in another war. A war before the neat wires and the firing handles, a war where engineers woke up a charge the old way, the hand way. Up close with the skill in their fingers and nothing else, the young men did not know that way, they had never needed it. Pop knew it cold, the way you know a thing your life once depended on. The charges under that bridge were still good. The explosives were intact, packed against the stone, waiting. They could not be reached by a wire anymore, but they could be reached by a man. By a man willing to go down under the bridge, into the freezing black water, out onto the stone supports beneath the deck, and wake them up by hand. It was the worst place in the world to go, out of cover, down at the waterline, directly beneath the span the tank was about to cross. But it was the only thing left that could stop what was coming, and the old man did not waste a second arguing with himself about it. He had stopped arguing with hard choices a long time ago. He went down into the water. And here is the picture I want you to hold, because if any moment of that long morning deserves to be remembered, it is this one. An old man, 49 years old, gray in his mustache, a rifle with 4 bullets slung across his back. Lowering himself into a freezing Belgian river in December, the black water closing over his legs, his chest. Taking the last of the warmth out of a body that had been cold for hours. And wading in under the dark stone arch of the bridge, into the shadow beneath the deck, where the demolition charges waited against the supports. Above him the gray sky disappeared, replaced by the cold underside of a 100-year-old bridge. Around him, the river pulled at him, trying to take his footing. And his hands, blue and shaking and long past feeling, found the charge in the dark and began, very carefully, to do the thing they still remembered how to do. How an engineer wakes a charge by hand, without its wire, is not something I am going to lay out for you. And you do not need it to feel what it cost him. Know only this: it is close work, it is patient work, it does not forgive a shaking hand or a panicked mind. And the old man did it under a bridge, in a river in the cold, with a tank's engine growing louder above his head, his fingers barely working. His life resting on getting right the one thing he had been trained for, and had never once been allowed to do in this whole war. He got it ready. Now came the timing, and the timing was everything, and it was the cruelest part of all. Because he could blow the bridge right now, empty, and stop the tank from crossing. But a blown, empty bridge only stops the tank for a while. The Germans would find another road, another ford, the way they had been finding them all morning. The bridge would be gone, but the column would live, or he could wait. He could let the tank come. He could let it roll its great weight out onto the span, out over the water, out over the charges, and drop the bridge into the river with the tank still on it. One tank gone into the black water, plugging the crossing with 20 tons of dead steel that nobody could move. That would not just stop them for a while, that would end this road for good. But to do that, he had to wait while a tank drove directly over his head. So Walter Mercer climbed back to the foot of the bridge, into the broken stone of the abutment at the very base of the span, low behind the last of the wall, where he could see the deck above and reach what he needed to reach. He brought the 4 bullets up with him, because the danger now was that a German on foot might dash out onto the bridge ahead of the tank and find the charge and tear it loose before the tank ever crossed. 4 bullets to keep that from happening. 4 bullets to hold the whole bridge clear for the 1 minute that mattered. And he settled his cheek against the cold, wet wood of the old rifle, and he breathed out slow. And he waited for the tank to give him the one thing he needed. This is where the whole story has been heading, right here. The tank came out of the fog. It came onto the approach slow, feeling for mines, its long gun swinging like the head of an animal hunting in the gray. Behind it walked men in gray, close in its shelter, 10 of them, maybe more, no longer rushing, no longer careless. Coming careful and grim for the old man they could not seem to kill. They had stopped believing the bridge was easy a long time ago. Now they meant to do it right, tank first, infantry behind, and grind the last defender into the stone. Pop lay in the broken rock at the foot of the bridge with 4 bullets and a heart that would not slow down, and he made himself wait. A German broke from behind the tank and started forward onto the deck, the way Pop had feared, moving to clear the span ahead of the tracks. Pop fired, the man dropped, 3 bullets left, another came. Pop fired, 3 became 2. The tank rolled forward onto the lip of the bridge, testing the first stones with its enormous weight, the old span groaning under it. Almost. A third German started out along the rail, and Pop put his second-to-last bullet into him and watched him fall. And now there was 1 bullet left in the museum gun, 1, and a tank rolling out onto the bridge above the place where an old man crouched, with a charge ready and a single round, and nothing else in all the world. Come on, he thought, come on, just a little more, get out over the water. The tank advanced, its front edged out past the abutment, out over the first arch, its tracks grinding on the old stone. Dirt and grit and 100 years of dust sifting down through the cracks between the stones and falling onto the old man's upturned face. He did not blink it away. He watched the great machine come out over the river, foot by foot, its weight pressing down on the span, on the supports, on the charges packed against them. The whole bridge trembling now under the load. A last German rushed the deck. Pop fired his last bullet. The rifle they had laughed at all his life spoke for the final time that morning, and the last man fell, and the chamber was empty, and the museum gun had nothing left to give. It did not matter anymore, because the tank was on the bridge, fully on it, out over the water, out over the arch. Its whole vast weight sitting on the span above the charges, the one thing the old man had been waiting for since the engines first turned toward him. The tank had given it to him at last. For one strange, suspended second, Walter Mercer almost smiled. An old man too old to carry a rifle, a dead lieutenant's orders, a bridge that could not be blown, and here he was anyway. At the foot of it, soaked and freezing and out of bullets, with a tank on the span and the old skill ready in his hands. And the whole long morning come down to a single motion. He had held the bridge for nearly 3 hours, so it could be there for this exact moment. He reached for the charge, and he did the thing his hands still knew how to do. The world turned white. The blast came up through the stone like the end of everything, a wall of sound and fire and shattered rock. That swallowed the bridge and the tank and the river and the gray morning, and the old man crouched at the foot of it all. The 100-year-old span heaved up, broke its back, and came apart in the air. The tank, 20 tons of steel that no rifle on earth could touch, dropped. Its great weight finding nothing beneath it, where solid stone had been a half-second before, and fell tipping into the black freezing water in a roar of collapsing rock and tearing metal, and a column of spray that rose higher than the trees. The bridge was gone, the crossing was gone, the road to the river here at least was closed forever. Corked with broken stone, and a drowned tank that no one would move that day, or that week, or that war. And where the old man had been, at the foot of the bridge, beneath the falling stone and the rising water, there was smoke and dust. And the deafening silence that comes after a blast eats every other sound in the world. The river ran on the way rivers do. The dust began to settle. The spray came down like rain, and nothing in the wreckage moved. For a long time, nothing in the wreckage moved. The dust drifted down. The spray fell back into the river like rain. The roar of the blast faded out of the air, and left behind it the strange flat silence that comes after an explosion. A silence so total it feels like the world has gone deaf. Where the bridge had stood there was now a gap, broken stone tumbling down both banks into the black water, and in the middle of that water, half submerged, tilted, finished, sat the dark shape of the tank. 20 tons of steel that no rifle on earth could touch, dropped into a Belgian river by an old man's hands. And then in the broken stone at the foot of the near bank, something stirred. He was alive, barely. The abutment had sheltered him, the heavy old stonework of the bridge's base taking the worst of the blast and throwing him down rather than apart. But sheltered is a generous word for what the explosion did to Walter Mercer. It had picked him up and slammed him down into the rocks and the shallows. It had filled his head with a high ringing that drowned out the river. It had torn at him and bruised him and half buried him in shattered stone. And it had left him lying twisted at the waterline, soaked to the bone, one arm pinned, his ears full of nothing. His body a single deep ache from his boots to his skull, but his heart was beating, and his eyes opened. And the first thing the old man saw, swimming slowly into focus through the dust, was the gray underside of a sky where a bridge used to be. He had done it, he let that be true for one breath. Then the cold came for him, and the fight was not over after all. Because here is the thing that the bridge and the tank and the Germans had not managed to do all morning. The thing that now had a real chance of finishing the job. A man soaked to the skin in a freezing river in Belgium in December does not have long. The water that had hidden him under the bridge, that had let him do the impossible, was now pulling the last heat out of his body with every passing minute. He had been cold for hours. Now he was wet through and broken and lying half in the river, and the cold was no longer an enemy he could outwait. It was a clock, and it was running down towards zero faster than any clock that morning, and the old man knew it. So Walter Mercer, who had just held a bridge alone for the better part of 3 hours and brought it down on a tank, began the smallest and hardest fight of the entire day. He began to try to get himself out of the water before the water killed him. It took everything. He dragged his pinned arm free of the stone, and the pain of it nearly put him under. He pulled himself an inch at a time, up out of the shallows and onto the broken bank, his hands too numb to grip, his legs barely answering, every movement a separate act of will. He got himself clear of the river and into a hollow in the rubble where the wind could not reach him, and there, soaked and shaking and spent past the end of himself, he stopped because there was nothing left to move with. Across the river in the fog, the Germans were doing their own arithmetic, and for them it came out simple. The bridge was gone, the crossing was gone, their tank was in the river. There was no way across the water here, not for tanks. Not for the spearhead, not for the great charge to the Meuse that had counted every hour and every mile. Up and down the line that week, this same story was being written into the fate of the entire German offensive, blown bridge after blown bridge. Crossing after closed crossing, each one stealing the hours and the fuel the attack could not spare. So the Germans did the only thing left to do. They turned away from the dead bridge and the drowned tank and went to look for another road somewhere else, and the sound of their engines faded east through the fog and did not come back. This time it was real. This time they were truly gone. And the old man was alone with the silence and the cold and the river and the dead, and he closed his eyes. And he waited to see whether he would live long enough for anyone to find him. How long he lay there, he could never say afterward. The cold does strange things to time. Maybe an hour, maybe more, the gray light shifted. The ringing in his ears slowly gave way to the sound of the river. He drifted at the edge of something dark and was too tired to be afraid of it. He thought in the loose, drifting way of a freezing man, of a great many things of mud in another country a lifetime ago, of the faces of men long dead, of the young lieutenant lying up there in the snow with his orders still unsaid, of the boys who had laughed and the rifle they had laughed at. The old rifle still slung across his back, empty now, its work done. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a tired old man who had been cold for a very long time. He held on anyway, because holding on was the one thing Walter Mercer had always known how to do. And then through the fog on the western road behind him, the road he had kept open all morning so that other men could live, came the sound of engines. His heart sank and then it lifted, because these engines were coming from the wrong direction. To be Germans, they were coming from the west, from the American side, from behind him. They came carefully up the road. A small American column, moving forward to find out what had happened to a bridge that had gone silent on the radio hours ago and was supposed to be either held or lost. They came expecting the worst, and what they found stopped them cold. They found a crossing that was simply gone, broken stone tumbling into a river. They found a German tank sitting drowned and dead in the middle of the water. They found German soldiers down all along the far bank and in the shallows. And at the foot of the bridge, more than a few men could have accounted for, far more. They found a dead American lieutenant in the snow with his pistol still in his hand. And down in a hollow in the rubble at the waterline, soaked and broken and gray, and barely breathing, his empty old rifle still slung across his back, they found one living man. One, the men who reached him first did not understand at once. How could they? They looked at the impossible scene, the blown bridge, the drowned tank, the dead enemy everywhere. And then they looked at the single old soldier they had pulled from the rocks, and the arithmetic would not add up, because the arithmetic was insane. One man could not have done this. One man does not stop a column. One man does not blow a bridge with no wire. One man does not bring down a tank with a bolt-action rifle and a pair of frozen hands, but there was no one else. There were only the dead and the old man and the bridge that was gone, and slowly, as they got him warm, and got the story out of him in pieces, and looked again at everything around them, the men of that column came to understand that the insane arithmetic was the truth. The old fellow they had found freezing in the rubble had held this crossing alone, for hours, against tanks, and had closed the road to the river with his own hands. And among the men who came up that road, helping to move forward in the wake of the spearhead that had been stopped, were faces Pop knew. Some of the boys. Some of the very engineers who had fled into the woods at the start, who had been gathered up west and brought back as the line stiffened, who had spent the whole long morning sick with the certainty that they had left the old man to die at a bridge they had given up for lost. They had not expected to find him. They had expected to find his body if they found anything at all. They found him alive, and they found what he had done, and there is a moment I want you to sit with. Because it is the moment the whole story turns over. One of them was the boy from the truck. The 18-year-old who, in the dark before all of this, had looked at the old man's rifle and made the joke everyone always made. That museum gun gonna save us, Pop. He had said it the way they always said it, with the little laugh hidden inside. The laugh of young men who think they understand the world and have not yet been shown what they don't. Now he knelt in the snow beside the old man they had pulled from the river. He looked at the blown bridge. He looked at the tank dead in the water. He looked at the dead Germans and the dead lieutenant. And the empty old Springfield still slung across the back of the freezing, broken, living man in front of him. The slow, stubborn, one-shot-at-a-time rifle that they had all agreed belonged behind glass in a museum. And when he spoke, the laugh was gone. There was no joke in his voice now. There was no laugh hidden inside the words. There was only the thing that comes into a young man's voice the first time the world shows him what he did not understand, something quiet and shaken and close to awe. He looked at the old man and the old rifle, and all he could manage was the old name, said in an entirely new way, Pop. That was all, just the name. But the mockery was gone from it, gone for good, and it was never coming back, not from that boy, not from any of them. The old fellow they had carried as a kind of joke, the mascot, the one too old to carry a rifle, had held a bridge alone for the better part of a morning, and closed the road to the river, and there was not a man kneeling in that snow who would ever laugh at him again. They wrapped him in everything they had. They got the warmth back into him slowly, the way you have to, an inch at a time. The same patient way the old man did everything, and as the feeling came painfully back into his hands and the ringing faded from his ears, Walter Mercer lay in the snow among the men who had once laughed at him, and were now looking at him as if they had never truly seen him before. And he did not say much because he never did. He had not fired a shot in 4 months of this war. The boys had a joke about that too once. That morning he had fired 63. And every man who had ever doubted the old soldier and his museum rifle now knew exactly what both of them were worth. The bridge was gone. The road to the river was closed. The spearhead that had counted on it was already turning away to die slowly somewhere else. Out of fuel and out of road and out of time. The young lieutenant's last order, deny the bridge, had been carried out to the letter. By the one man he had almost been afraid to leave on the firing handle. And up on the bank in the cold gray light, the old rifle lay across the chest of the man who had carried it through 2 wars. Empty, scarred, ordinary to look at, and worth more than every modern gun in that valley put together. There was a story here now, a real one. the kind that does not stay at a nameless bridge on a back road, but follows a man home, and gets written down and outlives him. The men got Walter Mercer warm, and they got him back, and the old soldier lived. He spent a while in a hospital, getting the cold out of his bones and the ringing out of his ears, and then, because the war was still the war, he went on with it the way men did. He did not talk much about the bridge. Men who have done a thing like that rarely do. The ones who were there told it for him, and the telling grew the way these things grow. And somewhere in the retelling, the old man who was too old to carry a rifle became a story that followed him the rest of his life. When it was all finally over, he went home, and he got older still, and he put the old rifle up where an old rifle goes, on a wall over a mantel in a quiet house, and he let it hang there, scratched and plain, while the years went by. And the world moved on and forgot what a thing like that could do. That is where his story ends. A wall, a quiet house, an old rifle, and an old man who knew what it was worth and mostly kept it to himself. But the story underneath his story does not end there, and now I have to be honest with you about something. Because you have given me your attention for a long time, and you have earned the truth. Walter Mercer is a name I gave to a man so that you could see him. The bridge on the back road, the duel in the snow. The tank in the river, I told it to you as one man's mourning, so that it would mean something. So that it would not just be facts on a page. But the thing those facts add up to is real. The kind of thing the old man did at that bridge happened, again and again. All across one freezing week in December of 1944. And the men who actually did it were just as old, and just as overlooked, and just as deadly with a charge and a cold head, and most of their names we will never know. So let me tell you what is real. Let me tell you the true story this one stands for, because it is even better than the one I made. In the winter of 1944, almost everyone believed Germany was finished, beat, out of men, out of fuel, out of time. And then, on the 16th of December, Hitler threw his last great offensive of the war straight through the quiet forests of the Ardennes. A surprise blow aimed at splitting the Allied armies and driving all the way to the sea. The battle it became is the one the world remembers as the Battle of the Bulge. And at the very tip of that whole offensive was a real armored spearhead, led by a real man, SS Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Paper, whose battle group started the attack with around 45 men and hundreds of tanks and guns, and whose orders were to race for a river called the Meuse and not stop for anything. He was the spear point. If he broke through, the whole offensive had a chance. He had one fatal problem, and it is the same one that runs all through the story I told you. Paper knew from the very start that he did not have enough fuel to reach the river. The plan only worked if his tanks could grab American fuel along the way and keep moving. If they stopped, they died. The roads in those hills, as one account put it, were suited to bicycles, not to tanks. Every hour he lost was fuel he could never get back, and here is what stopped him: not one great battle, bridges. Paper's column ran into blown bridge after blown bridge, and roadblock after roadblock, and all of it began to show on his fuel and his ammunition. His huge tanks needed big, strong stone bridges to cross the rivers in his path. The little wooden farm bridges would splinter under their weight. So when the Americans fell back in front of him, small groups of them raced to reach the crossings first, not to hold them, but to drop them into the rivers before the German armor could roll across. And the men who could do that, the men with the skill to bring a bridge down, were the combat engineers. They earned a nickname that week. The Germans came to call them the damned engineers, because every time the tanks thought the road ahead was finally open, the engineers had dropped another bridge into another river right in front of their faces. At a town actually named Trois Ponts, which means 3 bridges, American engineers got there ahead of Paper and blew the spans in time, forcing his whole column to turn away and hunt for another road. At another spot, the defenders found a fuel dump of some 2 million gallons and turned the fuel itself into a wall of fire across the road. It worked. The greatest spearhead of Hitler's last offensive was strangled not by a bigger army but by blown bridges, stiffening defense, bad weather, and the fuel clock that the Germans could never beat. Paper never reached the Muse. His column ran out of steam, and then out of fuel, and by Christmas Eve he had to abandon his tanks and lead the survivors, around 800 men out of the thousands, he started with, back toward the German lines on foot. The spear point of the whole offensive walked home in the snow, beaten, leaving its cold steel behind in the hills. That is real, you can look all of it up. And when you do, remember that behind the famous bridges and the famous names were countless smaller stands. At crossings no history book bothered to name, by men whose names no one wrote down. Where someone cold and tired, and often a good deal older than the boys. Around him did exactly what the army needed, and held a road 1 more hour. The old man I called Walter Mercer is my way of letting you stand at one of those bridges and watch. If you want to walk further into the true story, the real places to start are easy to find. The National WWII Museum tells the story of Paper's drive and the defense that broke it. The Tank Museum lays out the German armor and the fuel problem that doomed it, and historians have written the spearhead's tale day by day, including David Cook's book Kampfgruppe Paper, The Race for the Muse. Go read it. It is one of the great stories of the war, and it is true. 2 more things are true, and they are the heart of why I told it the way I did. The first is the man's age. The picture we carry of a soldier is a young man, and most of them were, but not all. Older men served, veterans of the First War who came back when their country needed them again, men the army kept out of the front lines, and put to work in the trades that win wars quietly, the building and the fixing and the bringing down of bridges. An older soldier was not weaker. Often he was the steadiest hand in the unit, because he had seen it all once before. And the panic that takes young men did not take him. The thing the world calls too old is sometimes just another word for has done this before. The second true thing is the rifle. The old bolt-action gun the boys laughed at in my story is a real weapon. It is the Springfield, an American rifle that you worked by hand, 1 shot at a time, and it was not a museum piece at all. It was the standard American rifle of the First War, and it was still carried by some men into the Second. Valued exactly because it was so accurate that it served as a marksman's and sniper's rifle. The faster new rifle was better for most things, but in the hands of a patient man who knew how to use it. The slow old gun was a precision instrument that could reach out and end a fight with a single careful shot. The boys who laughed at it were laughing at something they did not understand. The old men who carried it understood it perfectly. So think about that the next time someone tells you the old way is finished. The old way is not finished. It is just waiting for the moment that needs it. And that brings me back to where we started, on a freezing morning at a small stone bridge. With one old man who everyone agreed was past his time. They told him he was too old to carry a rifle. They were not entirely wrong, by the measure they were using. He could not run 20 miles in the snow with the young men. He could not storm a beach. The army that sidelined him was not being cruel, it was being sensible, by the rules that say a soldier is a young man's job. But there are some jobs that are not about being young. There are some jobs that are about being still when stillness is impossible, and patient when patience is the last thing a man wants to be, and steady with cold hands while the world comes apart, and those are not a young man's gifts, those are an old man's gifts. They are bought with years, and they cannot be issued like a rifle. They can only be earned slowly, by living long enough to have them. The boys had a measure for what a man is worth. And by their measure, the old fellow with the gray mustache and the slow gun was a joke. Then they stood at a blown bridge and looked at a tank in a river and a single living man pulled from the rubble. And their measure broke in their hands, and they had to find a new one. the mockery left their voices and never came back. That is the real ending of the story, not the bridge, the moment the young learned what the old were worth. Picture the rifle now where it ended up, on a wall over a mantel in a quiet house the way it really would. Or behind glass somewhere, in a small museum in a small town, in a case with a faded card beside it. People walk past it every day. It does not look like much. It is a plain old bolt-action rifle, scratched along the stock. The bluing worn off the metal, where a man's hands held it for 30 years. It looks like any other old hunting rifle. The kind of thing you would find in 1,000 attics, the kind of thing you would not look at twice. But it is not. That rifle held a bridge. That rifle stopped a column and won a duel in the snow. And fired its last shot while a tank rolled overhead, and then went quiet while an old man's hands did the thing that finished the job. There is a whole morning inside that plain old gun. There is a young lieutenant's last order carried out. There is a road to a river, closed forever. There is the moment the laughing stopped. You would walk right past it and never know. It looks like any other vintage rifle in any other case. But it is not, and now you know why.